Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 1st of September 2023, but we've got lots to discuss with you. So let's begin without further ado. Our first story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the second martyrdom anniversary of Syed Ali Gilani Saab, veteran Kashmiri leader and head of the APHC All Parties Hurriyat Conference. It has been 2 years since he left us for a higher abode, but his struggle, all the zeal, all his passion that he put in decades for the Kashmir cause, for the right to self-determination for the Kashmiris continues. And he might not be with us since the last 2 years, but his struggle, his movement continues with even more zeal and fervor. We will be trying to decipher a bit of the work that Mr. Gilani did during his lifetime and the same work that continues even to date. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the terrorism and of course what has happened in Bannu, where a motorcycle-borne suicide bomber exploded himself in a military convoy, and that resulted in the martyrdom of 9 soldiers, while 5 others were injured in this blast in Khel that happened in Bannu. Such incidents are happening in 2 provinces, namely Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Who are the people behind it? What is the purpose? Are there other regional players that are deliberately trying to destabilize Pakistan to add to its woes? We will be deciding and deciphering that during the course of our second story. And our third story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the super moon that was witnessed all across the world, including in Pakistan, Wednesday evening and Thursday evening. It's called a blue moon because this is the second full moon that we see in a month, and this was a second full moon that we saw in the month of August, and we also saw Saturn peeking from behind the moon this time. So this is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first, and that concerns the Kashmir movement, the fight for the right to self-determination in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the role of Syed Ali Gilani Saab, the chairman of the All Parties Hurriyat Conference. More in the following report.
He was the icon of resistance, an immovable rock in the face of Indian brutalities in occupied Kashmir. The second martyrdom anniversary of Hurriyat leader Syed Ali Gilani reminds the Kashmiris all over the world of the mark left by him. Gilani had been thorn in the eyes of the occupiers since early 1960s, when he began his struggle to merge Indian-occupied Kashmir with Pakistan. Despite being jailed for nearly a decade in 1962 and subsequent restrictions, Gilani couldn't be deterred. Gilani transitioned from 3-term legislator for his home constituency in Sopur to becoming a spiritual leader for the people of Kashmir. He remained steadfast in his cause and rejected any talks with Indian occupiers unless they accepted Kashmir as a disputed territory. Even in flailing health in his later years, Syed Ali Gilani did not budge from his position on Kashmir and its people. Syed Ali Gilani embraced martyrdom in the custody of Indian police on September 1, 2021 at his Haidarpura residence, where he remained under house detention for over a decade. The Kashmiris living on both sides of the line of control and across the world will hold protest demonstrations to draw the attention of the international community towards the Indian brutalities in the occupied territory on Syed Ali Gilani's death anniversary. APHC Azad Jammu and Kashmir chapter will hold a seminar in Islamabad, while rallies are being taken out in Muzaffarabad and other parts of Azad Kashmir to remember the contribution and sacrifices of Syed Ali Gilani for the Kashmir freedom movement.
To discuss more on this very important issue, we've been joined in the studios by Dr. Awais bin Wasi. He's an expert on Kashmir affairs. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saab, it has been 2 years since Syed Ali Gilani Saab left us for a higher abode at the age of 92. Since the last 2 years, do you feel after his passing away, the whole era of valor, courage, resistance against the intimidation and subjugation has ended, or the fight continues, or the fight has continued with more zeal and fervor, with all the teachings and all the philosophy of Syed Ali Gilani that remains intact?
Exactly. This the movement which is going on in Jammu and Kashmir, it has been further intensified, and we can see more fervor and enthusiasm among the Kashmiris who fight for independence. Since Syed Ali Shah Gilani is a face of this political movement, if this movement, Kashmir movement, if it has any political face or any face, Syed Ali Gilani is the face of this Kashmir freedom movement. So he is the source of inspiration for that, and it still continues. If you see today, on the second anniversary, the different programs held in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, in Pakistan, in different parts of the world where Kashmiris are residing, in Jammu and Kashmir. So you can understand that how much people of Jammu and Kashmir, they give importance and they give reverence to the leadership of Syed Ali Gilani, and how he could be the source of inspiration for their movement for the right to self-determination. And I hope that it will continue till the final resolution of the Kashmir dispute.
And I hope that comes sooner than later. Dr. Wasi, I'd also like to understand, when Syed Ali Gilani Sahab passed away, he had wished to be buried in the Mazar-e-Shuhada. But not only was he denied to be buried amongst other Kashmiri leaders in the Mazar-e-Shuhada, but also restrictions were imposed as far as the grave of Syed Ali Gilani is concerned. Why were the Indians so afraid of Syed Ali Gilani? Why are the Indians so afraid of Syed Ali Gilani?
In fact, Indian state, they are not afraid of only the Syed Gilani when he was alive, but they are afraid of the grave of Gilani, as we were discussing, that they perhaps think that Gilani will inspire and Gilani will rule this movement from the grave. And the funeral rites, these rights which were established in all rules, regulations and all practices, and these funeral rights were denied by Indian authorities, and no family member was allowed to accompany the funeral, and later on even today they are not allowed to offer Fatiha on Syed Ali Gilani's grave. So I think that they are so much intimidated and they are so much threatened that even the image of Syed Ali Gilani can cause
tremors amongst the Indian forces and the Indian leadership. Exactly. Now, Syed Ali Gilani, I'd like to understand, is he still a very strong symbol of the Kashmiri resistance?
Exactly. Syed Ali Gilani is a symbol. Why? Because he remains uncompromising, and his stance at that time, some quarters, they were perhaps of the view that he is little stubborn. But history proved that he was right. That whatever he predicted, whatever he foretold, and whatever he said at that time, it proved true. Because in one of the interviews he said that 500,000 Biharis will come in Kashmir and citizenship rights or domicile certificates will be given to them. And this was the statement made in 2009. And similarly, Gilani Sahab said that the Indian military personnel, they would be given the similar rights, citizenship rights as well. And unfortunately, we witness now that it is being happening in Jammu and Kashmir. So this kind of vision was there in the leadership of Syed Ali Gilani. And second thing, that why he is the role of inspiration, source of inspiration, is that he has been always espousing the political struggle of the movement. And in 2010 and 2011, when there was an uprising and a peaceful intifada was going on, Gilani Sahab at that time, he tried to make the people understand that we should focus on the political dimension of the struggle so that we can have more sympathizers at international level. So I think that Gilani Sahab has a multifaceted angles of his personality, and that is why he is the only and one of the biggest sources of inspiration, and we can also bracket him along with the global freedom leaders like Nelson Mandela, Ho Chi Minh, and Che Guevara. As Che Guevara once said that a revolution is not an apple that falls when it is ripe, you have to make it fall. And Gilani Saab's struggle is very much true to this principle.
That
so I
is
think these are the things which inspired.
I think that this was very apt what you rightly said, attributing to Che Guevara. But you know, you talked about ripening of the apple. Since 1962, Syed Ali Gilani Saab has been tortured, incarcerated, jailed, pressurized. Till his death, there was all kinds of pressure put on him so that he ends his movement. Why could India not break his resolve in all these decades?
In fact, the stance which Gilani Saab was advancing and he was having, that was the principal position that he was having. Second thing is that if you see the life of Syed Ali Shah Gilani, you will find in his life the characteristics and features of steadfastness and truthfulness and the steel resolve that he demonstrated. Whatever he thought that this is true and this is the legitimate struggle of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, till his last breath he committed to that. And India tried a lot to break that commitment, but everything ended in smoke. For example, that Gilani Saab participated in 3 elections in 1972, 1977, 1987. Gilani Saab won these elections. So it means that Gilani Saab was not the one which India tried to project across the world, that he was stubborn and he was not ready to come on table. He was the one that who was there, and he represented his constituency in the assembly, which he didn't accept and didn't consider the legitimate one, but still, despite the fact, he opened this democratic channel and tried to exercise that thing. And still later on in 2004, when peace process started, again it was a lot of pressure on Syed Ali Shah Gilani to compromise. But Gilani Saab was saying that I am not against talks, I am very much in the favor of talks, but the thing is that I have some initial conditions, and the condition is that India first of all should recognize this Jammu and Kashmir as a dispute. And the second thing is that India should agree for the demilitarization, and the third one is that India should release the political prisoners. So if India doesn't agree to consider this case and to consider Jammu and Kashmir as a disputed territory, then all this is this is a futile exercise. So in fact he was not the one that who was an obstacle which India tried to project. He was very much flexible. If he had not been the flexible, so he would not have participated in elections, and he would not have given these conditions to have talks with the Indian leadership. So these are the things I think we must keep in view while remembering and while discussing Syed Ali Shah Gilani's contribution and his political struggle towards Kashmir's right to self-determination.
Dr. Awais bin Wasi, the fact also remains that Syed Ali Gilani Saab championed the APHC and headed it with a determination, with a zeal hitherto seen before. How do you feel the APHC has learnt as an organization from the methodology, the philosophy of Mr. Syed Ali Gilani?
I think that the philosophy which we can see in Gilani Saab's life and political struggle, there is a lot to learn from his life and his contribution. Number one is that I have already mentioned is the political face of the movement should be projected. The second thing is the indigenous character and face of the movement that should also be highlighted. And the third thing is that democratic options at that time before 1987, which Gilani Sahab exercised. So I'm not saying that at this current situation they should enter into polls, whatever happening in India, in Jammu and Kashmir, the situation is quite different. But the point here is that the democratic dimension or the democratic face should also be projected before the global community, that we are ready to resolve that, that issue. And the fourth thing is that Gilani Sahab has a intellectual and scholarly dimension as well, because he has produced a number of books.
Exactly.
So he inspired, motivated the young Kashmiris on the the dynamics of Jammu and Kashmir. He tried to convince them that what are the logical foundations, what are the legal bases, how this issue is important for their identity, how this issue is important for their development, how this issue is important for all the aspirations that they might have in their lives. So I think that these 4 or 5 things must be kept in view while formulating any policy on Kashmir by all parties Hurriyat Conference.
All right. Now, going beyond the all parties Hurriyat Conference, but remaining within the ambit of the Kashmiris, how important is whatever has been taught by Syed Ali Gilani for the youth of Kashmir? How are they taking inspiration from his teachings?
I think that youth is so much inspired by Syed Ali Gilani, because in his life, if you observe at that time, that Gilani was the person who has the final word for the affairs in Kashmir. When Gilani Sahab asks for agitation, all the Kashmir comes up for the agitation against Indian occupation, Indian suppression, repression. But when Gilani Sahab says, for example, in 2010, when youth, they were quite angry, they wanted to continue that, the armed dimension of the struggle. But Gilani Sahab tried to convince them that instead of going into this dimension, we should focus on the political dimension of that. And youth agreed to that. And the other characteristics, the other traits which we can see in Gilani Sahab's personality, they are so much inspirational for Gilani Sahab, because he was the one that who, whatever he said, he believed it. He was not the one that said publicly something else and privately something else. So that is something which also inspired the youth. The second thing was that he, throughout his political struggle, he remained firm on the fundamental belief of the struggle, and the fundamental belief is that people of J&K, they must be asked what they want. And even Gilani Sahab was so democratic. In one of the interviews he said that if majority of the people, if they want to go to India, so I don't have any objection.
But they should be given the right to decide what they want to do.
They should be given the right to decide. He was the firm believer of accession of Pakistan, because it was not, in one of the interviews he said that it is not just a a political program or a political belief. It's a kind of religious belief that he possesses. Religiously he considers that this is the destiny, this is the destination that must be materialized. So I think that these are the things which makes Gilani Sahab an inspirational voice, an inspirational personality, an inspirational leader for the youth of Jammu and Kashmir.
You made many similarities, you tried to draw many similarities between Nelson Mandela, between Che Guevara and Syed Ali Gilani. How do you feel Syed Ali Gilani's sacrifices have continued or will continue to inspire the oppressed and the weak nations, not just Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but across the world, nations of the world whose freedom has been taken away by imperial states or imperial forces?
Exactly. I think that it is the responsibility, it is our responsibility, means that the intellectuals, the writers, the journalists, the civil society, the other people, that they must highlight the struggle of Syed Ali Gilani. Some chairs in universities, they must be established. Some research scholarships must be awarded on Syed Ali Gilani, so that his struggle should be highlighted to the global community. And I think that that is the only way that the world can recognize his political struggle, and world can seek inspiration from his political struggle, because what India tries to project him is not true, and it belies what in fact the Gilani Sahab espouses, and what Gilani Sahab in fact throughout his life struggles.
All right. Now, Dr. Wasi, I'd also like to, I mean, in the context of what is happening in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, just in the month of August, 8 Kashmiris have been martyred by the Indian forces, and this is something that continues on a very regular level. And this is not just murder, there is incarceration, there is torture, there is rape, and the list goes on. Do you feel that the blood of martyrs, including that of our leader Syed Ali Gilani Sahab, the leader of the Kashmiris across the world, has foiled the Indian settler colonial design, will continue to foil this Indian settler colonial design that the current Indian government and previous Indian governments have also had?
I think that if history is any lesson, I think that these tactics which India tries to exploit in Jammu and Kashmir will backfire, because the graveyard's silence is projected and considered normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir. That is not normalcy. So what is happening in India, it will bounce back, and India, I don't think that it will be successful in achieving what it wants to achieve. For example, one example I frequently quote is that in 2010, when the peaceful intifada started, from 99 onwards, 99 to 2010, it was considered that everything was okay. There is, Kashmiris are settled, there is normalcy, there is no resistance. But in 2008 and 9 and 10 and then onwards in 2014, whole of the Kashmir come on the street and they asked for freedom. And it pricked the conscience of Indian civil society. Ajit Sai and Arundhati Rai and other writers, they wrote on that if Kashmiris, if they don't want to remain with India, let them do whatever they want. So I think that if we see the history of freedom struggles, and if we see the history, peculiar history of Kashmir struggle, I think that there is silver lining, and it will continue, and Indian designs will not be successful in Jammu and Kashmir.
Now, Dr. Wasi, we know when you look at the struggle for self-determination, for their right to decide what they want to do, this is a struggle that has been ongoing since decades. As you yourself pointed out, that this struggle became more prominent around 2008, 2009 and 10 onwards, and of course you mentioned 2014 as well. Syed Ali Gilani Sahab's 3 decades of work for the rights of the Kashmiris can never be denied. Whether the Indians accept it or not, the whole world has more or less accepted the work that Mr. Syed Ali Gilani has done for the right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people. This said, the West still remains mum to this day despite all these decades of struggle as far as the rights of the Kashmiris is concerned. Has all his struggle gone to vain, or is the time near when all of the struggle that Mr. Syed Ali Gilani and other leaders who have lent their life for the cause will bear fruit?
I think that the international community, particularly the powerful world capitals, they are condoning the responsibility that they have, the members of the United Nations Security Council, but the struggle and the sacrifices made by Syed Ali Gilani and other leaders and Kashmiris, I think that they will not go in vain. They will definitely bear fruit, and the day will come when Kashmiris will see the dawn of freedom. It might take time, but ultimately it happens, because this kind of, for example, if you see the ground reality in Jammu and Kashmir, so every second person is affected. So the resentment against India is so deep rooted that I think it cannot be uprooted. Whatever India can do, India, as a matter of fact, whatever he claimed, even in the recent past, after 5th of August, about development and prosperity, it cannot do anything. It didn't do anything. But the thing is that even if India does something, this kind of resentment, this kind of anger, this kind of frustration, which is there in the larger population of Kashmiris against India, I don't think that it could be diluted or it could be uprooted from the conscience and from the memory of Kashmiris.
I totally agree with you on that. Dr. Awais bin Wasi, expert Kashmir Affairs, thank you very much to have joined us. I'll end this segment, ladies and gentlemen, with some of the quotes on this very important day, where, of course, our caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar, said that in the face of persecution and hardship, the commitment of Syed Ali Gilani to the Kashmir cause has been unparalleled. The interim foreign minister Jalil Abbas Gilani Saab said he was a brave and steadfast leader. He has inspired generations of Kashmiris in their struggle for the realization of their right to self-determination in accordance with the relevant United Nations resolutions. The fight, the struggle for the right to self-determination of the Kashmir cause, of the Kashmiris, continues, but the foundation laid down by Syed Ali Gilani Saab will stay on and provide the basis for the struggle in the years and in the weeks to come. Let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns what has happened in Khel in Bannu. 9 soldiers have been martyred, 5 others injured in a suicide blast in the area. Not the first incident, and we certainly hope that this incidents will start coming to an end. Such activities have been going on in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Balochistan. What is the reasoning behind it? Who is behind it? What is the basic aim of it? More in the following report.
Pakistan is grappling with an increase in militant attacks emanating from across the border. Today's terrorist threat is more ideologically diverse and geographically diffused than that of 2 decades ago. In a recent report, the UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee classified South Asia as a high threat region with several states suffering attacks. Security forces of Pakistan are determined to eliminate the menace of terrorism, and such sacrifices of our brave soldiers further strengthen our resolve. 9 soldiers have been martyred while 5 others injured in a suicide blast in Bannu. According to ISPR, a motorcycle-borne suicide bomber exploded himself on a military convoy. Caretaker Prime Minister Anwarul Haq Kakar expressed grief and sorrow over the loss of 9 valiant soldiers in Bannu division. The Premier called such acts utterly reprehensible and said his thoughts were with the families of the martyred and those injured. On August the 22nd, 6 soldiers embraced martyrdom in an exchange of fire in South Waziristan district, the military's media wing said last week. According to Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies, Pakistan saw a staggering 79% increase in militant attacks during the first half of 2023 compared with the corresponding period of last year.
Now, to discuss this very important issue, we've been joined by Brigadier Retired Rashid Wali Janjua Sahab. He's a senior analyst. Sir, thank you very much to have joined us. I'll begin with this report by PICS, of course, that is the Institute for Conflict and Security Studies, that shows the increase of 79% in the first half of the year as far as terror incidents are concerned. What are, in your point of view, the major factors that are impacting Pakistan's security?
If you're asking about the terrorist incidents, then this aspect of security is very clear, because the TTP has started regrouping, and there is a clear spike in its operations. And if we carry out a quantitative survey, the deadliness of the attacks and the frequency has clearly spiked. And the reasons are multifarious. You cannot ascribe a single reason to this phenomena. It all started with the failed or what many criticized the negotiations which were carried out with TTP with the purpose to bring them on to a common understanding of laying down arms and accept the constitution of Pakistan. But that did not come to pass, and instead they started coming up with those demands which no state could ever have conceded. As a consequence, the talks also broke down, and some of the elements which were allowed to come into the Pakistan's territory as a confidence-building measure, they also regrouped, and now their activities have got a clear traction. So there are three main reasons which I can point my finger at. And the first reason is that there is a vacuum in the tribal areas, former tribal areas. This vacuum is a consequence of a weak police presence. There is no police, and the system of administration that was earlier on very effective, which was FCR based and which had served during the colonial time very well, and that was linked to the Rivaj. So that was also changed. The whole sociological structure of the areas was changed, and we saw that there were Maleks who used to call the shots, and they were also replaced. That vacuum still exists, and once the army went in earlier on in Operation Zarb-e-Az, it sanitized the area of the presence of TTP. So those elements crossed over into the Afghan side of the border, and they sought refuge there. So after the coming of Taliban in the present Afghan government, that is not that strong, and though they have established a fair measure of control throughout Afghanistan, but there are still elements like ISKP and Al-Qaeda which are creating trouble in Afghanistan.
And now, Brigadier Sahab, I'd like to understand this. You talk about the Afghan Taliban. There is a report by the United Nations Security Council that says that of course, this new interim government of the Afghan Taliban has emboldened the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Do you feel the Afghan government, including the statement by the Afghan Supreme Leader as well, can stop this transnational terrorism that has been operating from Afghan soil and has been destabilizing Pakistan through incidents such as these?
You see, things are not that simple, and it's a complicated mosaic out there in Afghanistan. Much as they would like the whole situation to be completely controlled by them, the Afghan interim government is incapable of exercising complete sway and complete control over these elements. It has, tried its best, because if they start into a combative mode and they stop them with force, they fear that some of these elements will make a common cause with ISKP and they'll start fighting the Taliban. And in many cases, this has also happened, some defection from TTP towards ISKP and some defection from ISKP in TTP cadres, and both creating troubles for the Afghan interim government. What the most important development has taken place in the recent past is a clear message by their supreme commander, the supreme leader, Abdullah Akhundzada, that the Afghan soil will not be used for any terrorist acts, and anybody who goes and crosses the Pak-Afghan border and launches attack on Pakistan's armed forces or civilians is not doing jihad. And in fact, anybody who gets killed, the funeral rites should also not be offered. So this is a very, very strong statement.
It is a strong statement, Brigadier Sir, but has it had any impact?
It hasn't had an impact at the operational level so far. And the thing is that we must understand that during the last 20 years, once we saw Afghan, territory, which was in turmoil due to foreign occupation, and there was a complete war going on, they used to externalize their failures upon us and always used to accuse Pakistan of having sanctuaries. And this was a standard refrain of Ashraf Ghani government, and before that, Karzai government as well. Now, you see, we know there's an Afghanistan which is internationally isolated. Their government is still in kind of a financial turmoil. Every year they face humanitarian crisis. They are in no position, in fact, to completely control these activities of TTP. They, at best, what they can do is to have an understanding with us, to help us in our IBOs, and in many ways, that several engagements have taken place, and Pakistani law enforcement agencies have carried out intelligence-based operations and some over-the-horizon help also. Now, that kind of a thing is the thing which is tangible, which is a tangible contribution, and those engagement channels should be further strengthened. And outside the media glare, we should keep this engagement very strong and keep prodding the Afghans to keep pressure on TTP not to indulge in those activities. But most important thing is that we need to take care of our area ourselves. We need to do a better job of our border control. We need to do a better job of our intelligence-based operations. And most important thing is it's all of the government approach that is needed. Armed forces alone are not sufficient, because army, which is bearing the brunt of this operation, now this can do as much. It can go and occupy the area. It can go and sanitize the area. It can conduct IBOs in coordination with the civilian law enforcement agencies. But until and unless there is a viable district administration, there is a local, intelligence network which is supported by the law enforcement agencies of the KP government, and the CTD, which was not very strong, the civilian counter-terrorism department, that needs to be beefed up a lot. So all those, counter-terrorism measures have to be taken, and we need to forge a better linkage with the local population, because so far the tribes are with us, and had it not been this case, the situation for Pakistan could have been worse. So we must
Brigadier Sahab, I'd like to refer again to the report by the United Nations Security Council that says that the basic modus operandi of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is high-value targets on the border areas and soft targets in the urban ones. What does it say about the TTP's ambition or operational capabilities? And do you feel this modus operandi is a deliberate one?
You see, we must understand that what TTP is doing is recourse to the classic guerrilla operations, and they are doing the terrorist acts like any terrorist entity does. They are operating in cellular mode, and their sleeping cells are activated when there is a need. They merge with the population. They go for the low-cost solutions. For example, this motorcycle attack, which was explosive laden, for them, it's a low-cost option. For us, it's a very high-cost, thing. So that payoff that they are getting because of these low-cost operations has to be attacked. Their logistic chains have to be, in fact, targeted, and we have to completely map their resource base as to what is sustaining this proxy warfare, because there is a proxy warfare element. There are external factors and external agencies like RAW which are clearly supporting them. And we must attack those logistic linkages very effectively through our intelligence network.
Finally, I'd like a short answer to my last question. In the wake of the huge arms and ammunition that the United States left in Afghanistan, that is currently being used by organizations such as the TTP or the ISKP, do you feel the importance becomes even more paramount of a counter-terrorism collaboration between the United States, Pakistan, and other important regional players?
Absolutely. And more than that, the regional countries have to also forge a complete alliance on that score. We need to be cognizant of the fact that there's a whole ecosystem of organized crime inside Afghanistan still, which thrives on gun running, narco trafficking, raising rents out of that and plowing back those rents back into purchase of arms. So the United States, Afghanistan, and Pakistan need to do a better job of the coordination and mapping out. But I don't know how United States would be effective because they have left those arms and ammunition inside Afghanistan, and that is now at the, either with the Afghan government, or in the hands of those non-state actors that are operating with impunity and several crime gangs. So this is a very difficult undertaking, and to me, a regional solution, the countries like Russia, China, the Moscow format, in which all the neighboring countries, important neighboring countries, Russia and Afghanistan, they forge a common approach on this aspect. And
I think that regional approach, Brigadier Sahib, is extremely important, and that is what is the need of the hour in the whole wake of what is happening in Pakistan. Other countries could very well be affected if this continues, and if this modus operandi by organizations such as the TTP or the ISKP or even the ETIM could pose a grave problem as far as security is concerned in the region. Thank you so very much, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua Sahib, senior analyst, who have joined us, to have talked to us about these incidents of terrorism that have been going on in Pakistan, the latest being what happened in Bannu. 9 soldiers lost their lives, were martyred. Let's end on a blue moon note, let's put it that way. A blue super moon was seen across the world, including in Pakistan, on Wednesday evening and on Thursday evening. It was a spectacular view. A lot of people took pictures, they took videos. You can see some of the images in the parallel window. This happens when there's a full moon on a second time in a month, and this is what happened in the month of August. On top of that, there was the planet Saturn that was also peaking a little bit behind from the moon, and so that gave an added how should I say, impetus, role, or beauty to this blue supermoon that we saw in Pakistan and across the world. This is rare, and this is something that a lot of people across the world have treasured through pictures and through videos, and of course it is a sight to behold. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. This is the last day of the week, so we'll see you inshallah on Monday with new stories and segments that pertain to you, us and Pakistan. Have a wonderful weekend. Allah Hafiz.